Steam Locomotives in Miniature at the Steam Workshop, Part 13, fitting the draw hooks and the drain cocks, then the interesting part, making the engine run. First of all though, fitting the draw hooks. Behind each of these draw hooks there is a stout spring, with a large washer secured by a 2BA bolt, which holds the spring in permanent compression. So what is the point of this spring and what does it do? Well, it acts as a shock absorber, and it really helps with the smooth delivery of power from the engine to the driving truck behind it. On an engine of this small size, it's not really doing very much, but it's traditional to have a spring on the draw hook. Painting the spring is a good idea to stop it from going rusty, but unfortunately I picked up the wrong brush to do this. This is an unpainting brush. I wasn't aware that the Steam Workshop had any of these special brushes, but I am now. I immediately changed it for another one, and this brush is fine. It applies the paint, but it doesn't remove it. I'm using exactly the same type of satin black paint that the frames have been painted in, and when this dries it will match the existing paint perfectly. It's time now, using some Loctite 542, to fit the drain cocks back into the cylinder. The holes in the cylinders are clear and the holes in the drain cocks are clear, and if you want to see how I did this, please watch the previous episode. In this clip I'm poking a very small drill through the hole in the drain cocks, not because they're blocked or anything. I'm just checking that I have them the right way around. And I'm pleased to say that yes, they are fitted the right way around, so a spot of oil on each one, just to make sure that they don't stick when I first operate them. In service, the drain cocks will be lubricated by the oil coming out of the cylinders when they're opened. In the following clips I will be fitting the arm that operates these drain cocks, so they're going to be opened and shut and opened and shut, and I want to avoid any possibility of scoring the tapered plug. Here is the mechanism, and it's connected to a lever in the cab by a long rod. When doing jobs like this, damage to the paint is inevitable. There's no real way out of it. I would make parts like this from non-ferrous metal that wouldn't rust, therefore I wouldn't have to paint them. But these parts are made from steel, so a coat of paint is fairly essential. Time to see what John's up to. Taking model engineering to the next level with John at the Steam Workshop. He's working on this locomotive. This is a very large 7¼ inch gauge locomotive with a 4/6/4 wheel arrangement, and it's called Little Bear, but there's not much little about it apart from the cylinders. The original cylinders were far too small, so John's made these from scratch. And this is a good example of reverse engineering. These cylinders were made to fit in the special steam chest. That's the big lump that fits between the frames at the front. And rather than scrapping the idea and just bolting on a pair of conventional cylinders, John's gone to all the trouble of doing this. Everything is sort of, well, elliptical. The ports are elliptical and the slide valve's elliptical, and there isn't much room for it to move, so he's really had to give this a bit of thought. This is a very old engine. It was built in 1912. The world was very good at engineering in 1912, considering they didn't have any CNC machines. I mean, just look at the Titanic. And just look at this engineering. These are the rods that operate the drain cocks on the engine I'm working on. Assembly is quite simple. I'm just putting some oil on the spigot that sticks out of the side, and I haven't removed the paint from the spigot. That will get removed in time. This rod, which is used to open and close the drain cocks, is a very loose fit on this spigot, and that's so it moves from side to side as well as back and forth. And this allows the operating arm to be lifted out of one of the slots that you can see here and moved across to the other one. When I watched the video back, I realised I hadn't fully tightened the bracket that holds this rod onto the frames. But I'll leave it like that for now because I can't get at it as it's at the Steam Workshop and I'm sat editing a video. The main thing is, as I move the lever back and forth, the drain cocks open and shut and everything's good. In this clip I'm applying some more black paint to the guard irons and the bolts that hold them to the frames, as well as applying paint to the brake hangers. It's no good having shiny bolts where they're just going to go rusty. I really do like this paint. It's called satin black, but it's really nearer to matte black than satin black, but it's dead right for the job. In this clip I'm running the engine up and down this piece of track. Why am I doing that? Well, the drain cocks are open, plenty of oil has been put into the pipe that leads to the steam chests, so I'm waiting for it all to run out of the bottom and clean the cylinders out. So once the oil was freely flowing out of the drain cocks with them open, I set the positions of the return cranks to where I would normally set them for starters, which is about 30 degrees off vertical, and before any keyboard warrior expert engineers write in, yes, I am aware of the right angled triangle and the described arc of the return crank. But don't forget, this is for beginners, and I don't do formulas and numbers, I just fix steam engines. John and I set up a rolling road and sat the engine on it. Then we supplied it with about 40 pounds per square inch of air, via a piece of silicone rubber fitted onto the inlet pipe to the cylinders. I then put the engine in full forward gear with the reversing lever and squeezed the trigger on the airline adapter, and this happened. I'll put that down to beginner's luck. I then started to adjust the return crank properly. And this involves moving the position of the return crank, and I'm moving it back a bit, so now it's less than 30 degrees. Let's see what happens this time. With both of the return cranks set in a different position, the engine seems to run quite well once again. So is it that critical? Yes, it is. The problem was that with the return crank set in this new position, with the reduced throw, the engine ran quite well in forward gear but didn't run at all in reverse. In this clip you can clearly see what I wear when I'm working on steam engines. It's a headset magnifier. I'm trying another setting, we'll see what happens this time. Well, it works in reverse and it works in forward, but it's running much better in forward than it is in reverse. Often I find when working on steam locomotives, there's generally been a bit of a problem doing this in the first place from the builder's point of view, either down to inaccurate machining or just inexperience. And the worst case scenario is that often the return crank has been cross-drilled all the way through the crank pin and a pin fitted when it's in the wrong position. And thankfully that's not the case with this little engine. The return crank just clamps onto the crank pin. I'm sorry about my arm in the shot, but what I'm doing at the moment is applying my body weight to the engine to put a lot of weight on it, and this is just to put the axle boxes in the running position, because when this engine has its boiler fitted and the tanks and it's full of water, then it's going to put a bit more weight on the track than it is currently doing. I notice the reverse lever's kicking a bit. This is not 100%, I think I'm going to call John over and see what he thinks. When I work for myself at home, I make the decisions, but I'm working for a company, so it's Simon and John who need to make the decision as to how far they want me to go with this engine. John's now sighting up the return crank, just like I did, and he's setting it to the right position. First one side, and then the other side. So now there are three of us looking at this engine, myself, John and Simon, and here's the live audio.
Well, if they're set right now, then it'll be in here, won't it?
That was shorter.
Yeah.
It'd push that way.
It would.
That way.
As three heads are definitely better than one, the general opinion is that I need to take off the steam chest cover to have a look at the valve events, and I'll be doing this next week. So until then, thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful.